Oh,
like here are the
we did. We
common
never.
pictures of things. So anyway, I'll go through with this information I have and things, but you may want to follow up with everyone like, hey, I believe there's been several of these kinds of things. Maybe Danny Johnson had one that got saved somewhere. I'm not sure.
I don't have one
Anyway,
from Jenny. I did have a draft of one like a year ago, and then stuff happened and I abandoned it. So I don't remember what state that's in. I can pull it up. I think we could probably take better pictures now, though, that we have these
yeah.
things,
Oh yeah.
but could reinsert those in. But it was basically, it followed the same um, order of things that you will probably follow of the females and the pitting, and then the 3 or 4 characters that you're
Hyacinths.
probably going to be showing today.
Yep. Okay. Yeah, I
Okay.
think people struggle with Ceratina, and it is tricky and takes a while, but we'll get there. So we'll start with females today, and it is one of the most common species that shows up in Eastern collections, particularly with pan traps. And so everyone's confronted with the same problems of the nuance of telling the different species groups apart. So I'm going to share my screen, and then we'll flip to the Discover Life guide. I don't know if Mike has a guide for Ceratina. Maybe that's
I'll double
something you
check.
could look up. Okay. You know what? I think he does.
I'm looking at it right now. He does have one.
Okay. So we can, so Claire, you can also review what I'm saying. I'm going to use Discover Life for convenience sake right here, but I think we're pretty much in sync. I've talked to Mike a bunch, particularly when Sandra Rehand's revisions came out to try and resolve some issues between some of these species groups. So did I share yet? No, I don't think I did. All right, maybe I did. Can people see a screenshot of a bee?
I don't see the screenshot, and I do have a Ceratina guide from Mike, but my copy is from 2020. I'm interested to know, I think it was Eric who said that he had a copy if you have one that's updated at all. But I'm sure the bees are pretty similar as they were 3 years ago.
Yes, there is a couple species from the Mike's area, which maybe we'll punt on. We have plenty to cover just for today. There's a species that's coming in. I believe it's been found now, maybe in Arkansas, certainly Mississippi and Texas. That's Skinneri, which I just got specimens of, so I'll have to look at those, but I'm not ready to talk about them yet. And then there's something that Mike calls near strenua. So we can look at his guide at the end and discern what he means by near strenua and strenua. Right now we have it recorded just for Arkansas and Mississippi. So
and we can see your screen now.
Okay, good.
And I think that maybe I have an outdated guide, but I'll share it if we work from it.
Yeah, I'm not sure the near strenua I think is now in there. And I'm pretty sure that we've incorporated into the guide via Francis Mullen's work of adding keys that Mike has developed to the guide. I'm sure there's some tidying up to do in terms of listing by species. Okay, so anyway, I will use the Ceratina guide from Discover Life. Note that there is a male and female guide also lurking around in there, not on the page that we generally use here to go to links. So if you go there, it's just Ceratina and opens up the guide we were just looking at. But elsewhere, there's a couple additional guides for males and females. And as we have discussed with David and other people, we will try and modify all these guides so that at the top page, you'll see information about the guide itself, what it's covering, what it's not, and the existence of other competing guides, so to speak, that are in the works. All right, so here I'm going to restart the guides where I was playing around with them beforehand. And if I hit the search bar, you see there's quite a few species here. I think these are all the species known from the US presaging work on this group for the other species. Right now, we're going to click on default for the eastern species. You will see here Shinnerzy. That's that south western part of the east that is now sneaking into, and the Ceratina near strenua, an undescribed species that Mike is been working with. So let's trim things a little bit. Let's go to North Carolina, and we'll get rid of those two other species for the moment. And we'll start with females. And so when we do that, we end up with a list that looks like this. Of these, this cockerelli is considered to be in a separate subgenus and is quite distinctive looking. So we'll throw ourselves over to a picture here of cockerelli. You can see just from looking at the face, very dark, almost black, perhaps even considered to be black, very shiny, super small, much smaller than even Ceratina strenua. The female that you're looking at here has this whopping big white mark that takes up a good bulk of the clypeus, larger than the other species. The vibe is just really different from that's a male. You can see the two white marks that are expanding, and that the clypeus is basically all white, and the two white marks are in the paraocular areas too. So female again, just a very shiny little tiny beast. So to be specific, that was the male at the last shot. So we go back to the guide. What we see here, what's going to separate, we'll concentrate, I guess, by species, and I'll just guide you through the characters in the guide that denote, and we'll cover all these characters, denote that particular angle. So you can see after the gender, we get to a female front tibia thing. So immediately we're going to be able to separate out several groups by how much white is present on the front tibia. And so we basically have three kinds of categories. Stripes are two categories, and a simple roundish not stripe mark at the base of the tibia. So the stripe, though, has a nuance to it. So there are two stripe categories. So basically, ivory stripe that's running about 1/3 to 2/3 of the tibia. And every once in a while you get faded specimens. Every once in a while you can't quite figure it out. Those should be set aside and come back to after you've gone through your specimens, because they do sometimes like to disappear in a ivory mark, and sometimes your imagination can run wild and you think you're seeing an ivory mark and maybe you're not. So if it's ambiguous, set it aside and then come back to it, and usually you'll have clarified it by the patterns that you're seeing in the species. So, but the difference here between a couple different species, so if we just have an ivory stripe running down 1 to 2/3, as we said, and it lacks a mark on the adjacent part of the femur, that's going to get us to strenua. Oops, sorry, floridana, rather. So floridana, as it might imply, southern species, but Sandra Rehan has found several of these well to the north. So this is a species that should be considered throughout much of the east right now. And there's some specimens, for example, we were just looking at some from the Great Lakes area that Clare had gotten. And we were both a little mystified because we could see a stripe. It matches and no adjacent mark on the femur, but it was Michigan, so very far away from what is traditionally seen to be the species range. But Sandra has been seeing some that she's identifying through molecular markers to the north. So beware right now that this is not super clarified. The other pattern of stripes is that there is a stripe, same basic time, place, date of the stripe, but there is a ivory mark present on the femur adjacent to that ivory mark on the tibia. And to illustrate that, I have a cockerelli here on deck. again, this very black bee, very, you know, like you're not going to wonder about this one. Thankfully, it's the only one in the east. In the west, you have a couple more species that have that are in that species subgenus group. So here's the white stripe. In this case, is basically running almost all the way, sort of peters out here in the female. And then there clearly is a white mark on the femur adjacent. So there's the boundary line between the tibia and the femur. There's a white mark on the femur. It doesn't extend far, but it is a white mark on the femur. And you'll see this same pattern, although this white stripe will be shorter, maybe to about there, maybe more like the third of the femur, the tibia on strenua. We'll show that definitely too. And then there'll be a white mark here. And in floridana, which we'll also look at, there is a stripe, but no white mark. Ceratina cockerelli tends to have a much more bright white marking than the other species here, who you definitely would say it's white, but there's a sort of off-white quality to it too, just demarking yet more information about this group, the species, that differentiates it from the other ceratinas. So to that extent, if we were looking at that particular specimen, we would end up with this. Now we're down to 2, cockerelli and strenua, and in the females. And if we want, we can hit simplify and see if we bring up, yeah, some Mike Arduzer key things here and keys from the original Discover Life. So basically, the vibe alone would tell you how to differentiate these two. But in this particular case, we're using a character here of the presence of one row of minute pins bordering the eye and everything else being smooth. So this is along the eye and the base of the antenna. So throughout that area. And then in the other species, you can see here from the side, I think that's David's shot there. You can see there's tons more pits along the edge. And if we look at the row here, it's just this one lonely little row. These are this dirt over there. So, but also just gestalting will take you to different places. So let's see what Mike says. Mike says cockerelli, black color, body color blackish and non-metallic, length small, 3 to 5 millimeters, head and scutum. I should also point out Kim Hunsinger. Shout out to her for finding out that little femur marking character. Very useful, particularly with floridana. Oof, what a nightmare otherwise. So head and scutum polished, thorax pronotum without dorsal ventral ridge. That's the one that I wasn't paying attention to. And the others, so these would be all the other eastern species of the different subgenus, that has a color that's bluish or greenish, and the head and scutum, lots and lots of pitting and not shiny in between, and then, or not much shiny. And then the pronotum with the dorsal ventral ridge present, its lower proportion with the sharp edge, i.e., according to Mike, finely carinate. So finely carinate, so a very fine raised line. This is something that I haven't looked at, but we'll circle back when we have a specimen up of these other species to see if we can locate that. So that you have several avenues that will take you out of Ceratina cockerelli land. It's also a very southern species. There's the first Tennessee record was something that we saw in Laura. Why am I spacing on her name while I'm doing other things? Laura Rousseau's group in Tennessee. So you might look a little further north than you would suspect, but I think basically Georgia, Florida, and then the southern coastal plain areas of the Gulf Coast states. So now, since we've been talking about strenua here in relationship to cockerelli, let's pull that one out and make sure I have a female here. and we'll take a look at it. Oh, that's a male. And this should be female. And yeah, here's a female. So this mark that it has on its femur, or tibia, rather, the white mark, and then the associated pale mark elsewhere, this should show up like that. I'm going to flip to the microscope. That is going to be a differentiating character for this species compared to the other blue Ceratina. It's sort of a mid-continent or middle latitude species. Doesn't get really far north and it doesn't get really far south. But in our area, it may, I'd have to look up the numbers. It may be the most common of the Ceratinas, but calcarata would be a very close second. So if we look here, get this in more in focus, we have, oh, that was good. We have the combination of the tibia down here in the femur. There is the white mark on, very small, but clearly present on the femur, and then
Hey, Sam,
adjacent.
can you
Yeah.
make the B full screen and so we don't have these sidebars?
Oh.
We can see a little bit closer.
Right, I can.
Thank
do
you.
that. Okay. So I'll refocus here a little bit. There we go. So femur, tibia, and you can see that the white mark is a little off-white, yellowish, perhaps even more ivory, as they might say, compared to the bright white of cockerelli. It also only goes about halfway, and cockerelli was going quite a bit further. But here again is this white mark on the adjacent section of the femur. Thank you, Kim Hunsinger, for finding that. And we will jaunt off to floridana to see that illustrated in the in that species. So here you can see this pitting is super extensive compared to cockerelli, pitting everywhere. And cockerelli, this is almost all smooth and shiny and definitely black. So here, I believe, is the pronodal area that Mike was talking about. And we'll see if we pop this up several times. This looks like a very sharp pronodal ridge area, and maybe this is the fine carinate lines leading off from it. We'll look at the other species that we're going to put up on board to see if we see that a little bit better. This is then, now this combination will differentiate strenua from, in the female form, from the other blue species. And usually it's, well, it's never large, right? So sometimes the large species can be small. In other words, whatever, bad food, something like that, they become a whole lot smaller, particularly in the males. And every once in a while in the females, so you have to watch out. But if you're looking at your collection and you have a whole tray of Ceratina strenua, and some are pretty big, those are almost certainly not Ceratina strenua. So they're never become big. But big things can become small in the reverse. So we'll pull this out.
Eric, what do you mean? Do they have an F1 class?
Oh, you mean like population wise, whether there's a original first female that's larger and the F1, in other words.
Yep.
Yeah. So I'm not aware of that. I think we're trying to get Sandra Rehan on, so that'd be a good thing to ask. She's a Ceratina expert and does all kinds of cool things with the biology. So you could ask about that. But you can see larger F1s in, the one that I'm most familiar with would be Halictus legatus / powii, where the females, the first females out, who may have overwintered, I'm not sure, are much bigger than the subsequent ones, but they have these weird eusocial environments. And again, we should ask Sandra about the social environment of Ceratina. I believe they're very interactive with their young, which is different than other species, but I'm not sure that they are doing anything that would be called eusocial. So now I'm going to pull up on deck floridana. So floridana, as was mentioned, very southern species, and is larger than strenua, has the white ivory stripe. Sometimes this level of ivory stripe that we're going to be looking at here is, I would say, ambiguous. And so when dealing with floridana, a lot of times what we're doing is like setting it aside, setting it aside, setting it aside and returning to it for more study. And then in almost all cases, I have a number of specimens that I cannot assign to species. So we just call them Ceratina species because of their little tricky things that they have where you sometimes just can't see the, I need to adjust this one, the characters that you would like to be on there. And you'll see, okay, now I get this right. On this specimen is a good example where the white stripe is there, but it is not as prominent as the, I should have gotten rid of that label, but this will be visible, but not as prominent as cockerelli and strenua. Also, in the range where the species spends most of its time, they often don't really overlap with strenua, but they do enough that you have to consider it. So I'm getting some glare on this. Let's see if we can roll up. We're at 5. So I'm at my highest level of visibility.
Sam, can you say more about that they don't overlap? Is it just is it on a north-south gradient, or is there some other environmental gradient that we're talking about there?
Nope, north-south. So the strenua sort of peters out and to the south, and about that same time, floridana is petering out to the north, but that's also an area that is generally under-collected. So a lot of the further south areas, coastal plain areas of Georgia, Alabama, and up north towards Tennessee. Really, we don't have much material. So what the patterns are, so like people are struggling already with identifications of these species. So it would be nice to clarify that note. And I know that there is a lot more work in Mississippi and Alabama right now. I don't know much about anything going on Florida, Georgia area anymore. This goes out of focus a little bit, but okay, here's the tibia. This is floridana, and here's the femur. There might be a little reflection here going on, but there's no yellow mark on the femur. And this yellow mark is partially disguised by the lighting in here. Oh, I forgot to turn on a couple of the lights. Maybe that'll help. Well, it made it brighter. Well, let's see what happens when I turn off the ring light. Oh, you just can't see it.
What happens when you give it a dark background?
I could. Let me just talk about it without, and then I'll take the labels off and put it back on. But that's probably going to be useful. You're right. So, and the stripe is just not as clear. So the stripe goes to about there, but it's not as big and wide. So I'm going to take your suggestion, Claire, get rid of the label on this, which is whitey white. See if we can find our bad boy, girl, rather. in here again. And oh yeah, that looks better already. Let me zoom in as much as I can on this. Get a little focus going on. Did I turn on the lights here? I guess the light of the reflection of the white background was doing a lot of that. Okay, so again, we're slightly a different angle, which is good and useful. And what we're seeing is here's the femur edge, no yellow. This is reflections. And here is the tibia, slightly out of focus. At this magnification, it's a little tough to keep things so glossy in focus. And here's this white stripe. It goes even less and is a little, you can see it turns sort of amber at the end, but it's there. We'll show in a second dupla, calcarata, mikmaqi group that has a white dot. So this white dot is basically right there. None of this stripe stuff going on. And so that defines if your female floridana. The male floridana is problematic. So, but usually you're outnumbered by your females. So that's helpful. Female also has a pretty, unlike calcarata, often, not always, has a clipial white mark that is strong and solid and is not partial or nearly absent, as in calcarata. Okay, so we've knocked out 3. Now we have 3 left. mikmaqi and calcarata and dupla. So
I want to read the couplet from Sandra's publication for floridana, which I have found helpful. So this is separating floridana from strenua based on the stripe. And for floridana, it reads, usually larger, length 5 to 7 millimeters, scutellum quite flat and closely punctate, separated by less than 1 puncture diameter. Mesoscutum between medial line and nautilus, and posteriorly more densely punctate. Puncture separated by equal to or less than 1 puncture diameter. Color more bluish. And I think you had a really blue one right there. That one was like
so
oceanic.
Right. So that bluishness does come up, but I found that as you go to the north, including stuff that Sandra had determined as floridana from molecular stuff, was the same color blue. So my feeling is, I'm trying to get back to the guide. Here we go. My feeling is that the deep midnight blue, oceanic blue, whatever you want to call it, that floridana has, may be a marker of the color alterations that often occur when species move south. So, for example, the algochlorella groups will move from just green. They're always green. Then they'll start picking up blues. They'll start picking up purples, and that happens in the agapostumums too. So I feel like maybe the Ceratina thing, which is a metallic color, is floridana in the deep south, may be something that is simply an artifact of how colors shift, these metallic colors shift to the south. What's going on, I don't know, because these northern ones that I've seen that Sandra sent back to me that were floridana, but from Maryland, and like that's the same color as all the other Ceratinas. So potentially useful. The other thing
maybe
about
like one of those things of like, if you have one that's super blue and it pops out, then okay, great. That could be a character to support your analysis, but don't be basing your whole line of evidence.
Right.
What do you think
And,
about the scutellum flatness thing? Have you used that?
I've not been able to see that one, but it's not something I've used an awful lot. So you know, I'm more of the femur and tibia school of thought, and with the notion is that it's still like murky. So I think a bunch of these things have been better clarified now for the mikmaqi calcarata dupla set in the north, which were also murky initially, but I think we know more as a group who does a lot of identifications on how to split those out and where the boundaries are just by a lot of processing many specimens. So yeah, still plenty of stuff to learn with the floridana, and I haven't seen enough specimens that I've could come out either way on the flatness thing. It's just another subtlety. So, and there could be more. This is the kind of thing that over time you can pick up a whole bunch of things. All right, good to hear though, the refreshing thing, particularly about the scutum flatness, to take a look and see if I can see that now. Okay, the triad that many people struggle with. You have dupla, calcarata, and mikmaqi. Mikmaqi described relatively recently, also by Sandra and others. And the dupla calcarata have been around for quite a long time. So mikmaqi and the females would have come out of the calcarata clan. So you're not going to see any differentiation, say, from Mitchell, who did not recognize mikmaqi. And what you're looking for essentially is a difference between specimens where the scutum is highly pitted and encompass most of the scutum with pits. And then we'll talk about what does that mean? What does most mean? And then from scutums where the big chunks of the scutum don't have pits. So that's murky also. And again, it leads to, in some cases, having to set aside specimens as Ceratina species because they fall into what is perceived to be a ambiguous line. So I'm going to pull just randomly here, make sure I've got a female, a mikmaqi, that is a male. So while subtle, I do believe that they average a bit bigger than, that's a good one, but not pin. Problem is, if you pin it through the center, you often destroy exactly what we want to look at. So I'm going to try and find a glued one. Or maybe this one. So often I think they are the largest of the three, but that is really, there's a lot of overlap. Okay, this is good. And so we'll put this into, I'm going to take the tag off again and put that into the scope. And what we're looking at is, well, let's back up. Let's see if I have some nice pictures of these in the collections. So here's mikmaqi pictures, and I will, yep, have a female. So we'll, because sometimes these are easier to work with. So what we're looking at here in this mikmaqi, very strong, can it go up even more? Yeah, very strong white stripe on the clippius present. Not nearly as wide as we saw in cockerelli, but still very unmistakably long, goes almost all the way to the top and wide, and the margins are more or less entire. When we look here, we're looking at the scutum, and we'll bring up another picture here. Here's the parapsidal lines. I think Sandra calls them nautalices. Here's the other parapsidal line. These are just recessed suture lines, like there's the central one. And what you'll see is that along these parapsidal lines, there's only a few pits, and sometimes spaces where there's no pits whatsoever. Then there's a relatively large open area with no pitting. The central line has pits running down it on either side, and then it's repeated on the opposite side, symmetrical. So when we look at dupla, we'll see that there's usually at least two rows of pits running down the sides here on either side of the inside of the parapsidal lines, and these areas on either side of the central line are much wider and go all the way to the end, and often the entire area, but not always, is filled with pitting. And that would be your basically separation of duplas from the calcarata mikmaqi clan. So with this, you can't separate out calcarata. So calcarata and mikmaqi have essentially the same pattern of pits on the scutum. I'm going to flip to the microscope and see if we can basically replicate this in a specimen. So mikmaqi generally more northern than calcarata. We have them both in Maryland, tends to be a little more Piedmonty, a little more in the mountains, but can show up on the Eastern Shore too. Okay, so not as clear as the picture, but you can see the basic pattern. There's the parapsidal line all the way over here. This is out of focus. There's a central line. Here's this big open field with essentially no pits, or maybe that's one right there. This is too glossy to see. And then you have a simple row or one row. I'm not sure if I see that correctly. I'm going to bend the specimen over so we can see that spot a little bit more. But usually it's just at one row of pits along the edge of the scutum, or the parapsidal line. Okay. And you can see the white mark on the clypeus is full and complete. I don't know if we're going to run into, well, I think I'll run this up higher magnification. We're in a reflection thing going on, but to orient, here's a central line. This, I believe, is reflection. Here's the other parapsidal line, and you see that okay, so I should have mentioned that the interior edge of the scutum is always pitted in all of these, and then it's really what happens along the parapsidal line. And here you can see there's pits, and then there are no pits or one or two pits along the line, and then it's just a big open gap here in between. So same as it was. So now, and you can see a nice big honking mark on the clypeus, which often differentiates it from Ceratina or is associated with that, but it's not a gimme. Mostly all the mikmaqis have a big white mark. Mostly all the Ceratina calcaratas have a reduced mark, but some Ceratina calcaratas have a big white mark, so you can't just use that as a measure. Oh, look, here's our area here on the femur and tibia, and we'll see the alternative mark here, which is just, although there's a little bit of reflection associated with this, but so these are reflections. This, I believe, is the mark right there. It's basically just a ivory, again, not bright white mark that is right hugging up to the femur, but the femur has no mark whatsoever on it, and this white is restricted to the bottom. Every once in a while, this area that becomes a stripe in others has some sort of translucent amber feel to it. And that's a time to set that baby aside and come back to it. These are big. Ceratina strenua is small. Ceratina floridana is your danger thing, but it's going to have more pits all across the scutum. Okay, so additionally, so we have this problem with mikmaqi versus calcarata. Are really the best character. Again, some specimens just never get resolved because they're goopy, or it's like, I'm not quite sure I see that. What I want to see is you look at the abdomen, sternites, so the underneath of the abdomen, and the best way to do that, am I going in the right direction? I feel like I'm not. Maybe I am. Yeah, I am.
You were getting
The
there.
best, yeah, there we go. The best way to do this is from the side, because underneath are hairs. So this looks basically hairless. You can see a few here. I'll jack up the magnification and move this a tiny bit more in. So again, we're looking at mikmaqi, and there are hairs here. A bunch of small ones are simply prone, lying down, repressed in some sort of way, and certainly not sticking upright. And usually, if there are upright hairs in these lower ones, so here's, I believe that's S1, S2, S3, S4 is where you're looking for these things. There's very few, I think we maybe even comment maybe fewer than 10 that are upright like this. See those vaguely vague hairs. And we'll see in calcarata that there's numerous hairs upright here, and that they have a relatively bright white aspect. So even if there are hairs here, they tend to be on the amber end of the spectrum. But basically, it looks like somewhere they look relatively smooth, almost no hairs down here in this specimen, and that's the best way to tell the two species apart. So you put this specimen back together, and we'll now might as well jump over to calcarata. So again, calcarata has a mikmaqi-esque feel, and is the proverbial molecular neighbor. Well, I shouldn't say that. I don't really know if it's a molecular neighbor, but it has a morphological neighbor to mikmaqi. All right, let's see if this specimen has all the characters I want to see. This is a good one because it's not got a greatly reduced. Yeah, we're good. Okay, so we're going to see on the scutum the same pattern basically as I'm going to take the label off as mikmaqi. And we're going to see on the Clypeus, though, a reduction in the ivory marking. It's not gone by any means, but in comparison, and comparisons are always dangerous because you have to have something to compare it to. But usually, if you do any kind of big study in the East, you're going to get both these species, particularly if you're up towards the north, usually. All right, and so let's show the Clypeus mark there. So there it is. There's a mark, but this is a good example where it's just a little bit smaller. And you can see these edges are a little more vague, less crisp. Usually, again, you moving less, it's less and less white, more and more amber yellow kinds of things. But, if you didn't have a specimen next to you, that'd be pretty difficult to see. And this, if you didn't have comparative material, it'd be like, well, maybe not. These things are pretty widespread online, though. You can see this pattern, which I won't spend a lot of time going into. Central line, parapsital line, big open area without much pits. This area along the parapsital line, very few to little pitting at all. Now, the character, though, that we're going to look for is the character that is on the underside of the abdomen. Well, you will see, again, particularly in contrast to what we saw before, many white hairs. But, if you don't have comparative material and haven't looked at a bunch, should be like, maybe you might call that something else. Or is that a lot or is that not a lot? You know, it's not a lot compared to osmia. It's just a lot in comparison. Okay, I didn't turn this enough to mikmaqi. Dupla seems to have some, it's not a character we use in dupla. It seems to be more in between, I would call it. This is good. I could turn this a little bit more. We're not exactly seeing the entire underside, but you can already see down here a much greater amount of white hair sticking straight down and exposed. That really helps define. That's what defines that species from mikmaqi. So those white hairs, if you look straight down, they sort of disappear because they're semi-translucent. They fade into the color pattern. So you're going to want to look at a lateral view, so across the bow, so to speak, of the sternum, if that's a terminology, across the sternal bow. And this is a big piece of fiber, so you can ignore that. But that's representative. So that's the kind of thing you're going to see in calcarata. In the females, what time do we have, Claire? 1:52. Okay, good. We'll finish up.
There you go. You've heard it.
Yeah, right. I looked at my phone, has the time on it. So now the last one left, so we won't have time for males, is what we're murmuring about. So the last one left is dupla. And dupla and floridana, in the past, floridana has been considered a subspecies of dupla until Sandra was able to, see clear differences in the scutal patterns. What am I trying to say? Our sister species. Oh, I wonder if you can see the mark on the pronotum here. Yeah, it's got a ridge. Right, I'm gonna set up the shot under the microscope. So what you're looking for is just a dot on the tibia, front tibia. There won't be a stripe, so we'll look at that too. But when we're looking at let me see if I have a picture here of, so there's our mikmaqi with the big white patches. And if we go to albums, oops, or did I go all the way back? I did. I really want to go, sorry, albums, my collections, all the bees of Maryland, Apidae, it's the family, has Ceratina, and I was hoping that we have dupla. We do, and this hopefully will illuminate the pitting pattern. So here, actually, this is good. I think the one that we're going to see underneath has more pits. So this is kind of an ambiguous dupla. So you can see that there still are bare areas right here. You'll see in the other one that we're going to show under the microscope, there's not much, but there is a solid line of pits down along the parapsital line and some scattered ones there. So this is indicative of dupla, and you can see also the central area. See all these pits are running straight down and are quite a number of pits wide, whereas in calcarata and mikmaqi, these basically neck down sort of at the end of the central suture line period, with leaving one or two pit lines all the way down. A bit more ambiguous than I think this one that we're going to look at now. So dupla, let's see here, we need to bring this up.
Something I think is interesting looking at the the Rian publication and the stuff that we have on Discover Life and out of Mike's guides is that Mike speaks to the parapsidial lines, and the Rian group is looking at along the medial line, but basically the same thing of there's more or there's less. But I guess we have fact checks on both of those.
Yeah,
that whole gestalt thing.
Yep. And so here it's really clear, like central line, parapsidial line, and there's pits. So there's still fewer pits in this area, but the pits along here are basically 2 pit rows roughly wide. The central area is again this big band of pitting going down the center area. And so it's just way more pitted. And because nothing is very absolute, it's not like you can count the number of pits or anything and come up with an answer. We end up with little piles of Ceratina species. Like, is that dupla? Is it not dupla? A lot of times, any ambiguity, I just set them aside. And then at the end, after looking through all the specimens, I come back to it. And a lot of times I can tell from the patterns of the species present that the ambiguous ones are more likely to be one thing or another thing. So that's the pitting pattern. This one's much more extreme than the one that's online in the picture. Now let's take a look at hopefully I can find, I think the front legs here. Trying to get a good shot. Yeah, there we go. This is a pretty good example of how these white marks on the legs can be less than wonderful. In terms of what am I exactly seeing here? Because the markings bleed into other features of the architecture of the specimen. Oops. I'm going to move this gently. All right, we're at the upper extreme. So tibia, femur, we're looking edge on the femur. That's the edge of the femur. There's no white mark over there. And this is the white mark area of the tibia. And so it doesn't extend down far, but what's this? So this area here has this sort of vague, if we were to look at it under the microscope with our eyes, you'd see that this is a bit ambery and maybe, you know, a different color than the matrix of the rest of the leg. Again, moving us towards sometimes having to just say, we don't know on these things when you get into too much of this ambiguous stuff. So Ceratina is tricky in a way. The good thing is there's a huge volume, and if you can't, sometimes the males and females have different traits such that the males and females can help inform the opposite gender. If the one gender is tricky to ID, the other gender often can be a little more easy to ID. So usually at the end, you can put together a pretty good portrait of what the species composition is, but don't pretend like you can identify every single one. Don't pretend that. Okay, so I guess I will say, ask if we have any questions.
Would you prefer that people name things like, okay, I know that it's calcarata or dupla, so do a calcarata / dupla, or just go species?
You could do that. There's nothing wrong with that other than it takes longer to write all that out. And I'm not sure it adds a whole lot of information. Although it adds a little bit of information, you know, you've eliminated the other groups instead of just saying Ceratina spa. It sort of depends on the specimens, you know, because sometimes it's just a goopy specimen. Like I know it's a Ceratina, but I don't know what it is, or sometimes it's lost in the abdomen. And other times it's more what we've been concentrating on today, which is the ambiguity of the markings on a good specimen. Trying to get back here.
And you usually spend some time talking about the like distribution stuff. Do we have any besides the north-south gradient for like the floridana strenua situation? Do we have any east-west, or are any of your sandpit friends in here?
So in the scheme of things, dupla, in my opinion, is a species that hangs out an awful lot more at the drier end of the spectrum. So yes, we do see them more often in sand pits, and Ceratina calcarata spends more time in more moist areas and often shows up, for example, in the spring in woodland forests. And dupla, I pretty much think never does, and I don't think strenua either. So the broader ranges, I think I'd have to go look. We could do a quick look, but I think calcarata and dupla go pretty far north. And what am I doing here? I'm sharing on these species things. And so look at calcarata distribution. And, you know, it's basically southern Canada, right there at the edges. East, it runs through the, these are probably mistakes out here, runs to the Front Range. It looks like it runs down to California. Let's take a peek at dupla. Realizing, of course, some of these are old specimens and maybe murky from not being differentiated from mikmaqi, for example. But again, it's pretty much the same distribution. So I'm going to say, although it doesn't get as far west as calcarata, but in most of the east, you're going to have to deal with, is it one or the other? In the south, the floridana is mostly down in this area. Down here, cockerelli, similar. mikmaqi, we can click on that because that'll have more recent information, is going to be, in general, oh, maybe I'm wrong. Well, at least not, yeah, is more northern and is running down the Appalachians to middle latitudes in the Midwest, and seems to not leap too far out into the Great Plains.
Cool.
Any other questions?
There's nothing in the chat. Y'all are welcome to unmute. Small group.
So, yeah, I have a question. So we have collected a lot of Ceratina here at Ohio.
Uh-huh.
And do you think majority of them are just calcarata species?
Calcarata, yeah.
Calcarata? Or do we need to
So-
do any particular identification?
Yeah, so in Ohio, you could have strenua, mikmaqi, calcarata, dupla, no problem. And so, and my expectation is that you would. You can probably eliminate cockerelli, and then floridana has that, you know, we're really not sure what's going on with floridana, but you certainly would have more than one species, not just calcarata, although calcarata could be the most common.
So I also have a question about their habitat. When we did our experiments, we put out the raspberry stems out to attract the bees, but we attached the raspberry stems to the bamboo sticks. And the past 2 years, the majority of them were just nesting in the raspberry stems. But this year, There are a lot of them in the bamboo sticks.
Oh, weird.
Yeah, like why is that? Do you?
Well, so hopefully we'll get Sandra on here, and she has done so many studies using bamboo sticks and other sorts of things. I always had the impression that whatever stem they were using had to have pith in it, which is like, and brambles of different kinds were the perfect kind of suitable habitat, and they really didn't use stems that didn't have any pith like bamboo. But maybe because most of the time, if you're looking at mason bees and things like that, you don't put the stems upright at all. They're always on their side, or you're drilling holes in wood. So it's possible that it may not be so much the pith as the orientation vertically. But Sandra would know. I know she does a lot with goldenrod stems and things like that. But yeah, that's a mystery. First I'd heard of that.
Yeah, and she's the co-PI for the grant. I'll definitely ask her as well. Yeah, thank you so much.
Cool.
That was a cool one. So Thea asks, are there any resources beyond Discover Life for Western species? I'm up in BC, Canada.
Right. So there you can try out, because I believe that Kim Hunsinger started on the male and female guide. So if you go to a species page, here we can do that. If we go to Ceratina mikmaqi, for example, it brings up, oh, really? It doesn't show the males and females. Did we get rid of them? Let's go to a Western species.
Never used them. I've never had you've never shown them to me. I don't know where they are.
Oh, I thought they existed, but maybe they don't exist. Okay. Yeah, I don't see. Right. I don't see their being mentioned here anywhere else in these are Western species. So, okay. I thought that they had been worked on but never completed. However, if someone wants to from out west, we can show you how to score specimens for the West and add them to the guides directly. Additionally, I believe, I'm trying to think of what the last revision was. Was it Stefan? Does anyone know who did the last revision of Ceratina out west? But I know of no recent revisions that had keys associated with them for the Western species. But in general, we spend most of our time with Eastern species, and when we get Western material, we mostly ship it off to Westerners. So I'm not being very helpful. Corey Sheffield would be someone to ask, at Saskatchewan, as would Lincoln Best or Link out of Alberta, and also working in Pacific Northwest. They use something.
Will reminded us that our David has a Ceratina key that I had forgotten about, and it's going into the chat. He is in Oregon and Washington.
Okay, so he has a key for Oregon and Washington. That would probably work for British Columbia, I would imagine.
And it's based on the daily key. So I think that answers your question.
Daily, right. He's the guy that did the revision. So where can one get this key?
It is now in a link in the chat.
Okay.
It is now a link in the chat.
Okay. Yes, we need more keys out west in particular. So always encourage people to, help out on that.
And David specifically is looking for feedback on these. What is this type of key that he uses? Is this the lucid key? Or no?
It's not lucid. It's a freeware.
Identikit, is it? Yeah.
Yeah.
Because he's working on these. He also has one that he's working on for the entry into subgroups in that area. And that guide there's pros and cons to it. They can do different things that Discover Life does, and he's got amazing photographs on there. So he's often on these calls with us, and if not, we can connect you. So if you use them, I'm sure he'd like to hear everything you have, all of your thoughts. Okay, are we?
I think
Oh, and apparently Link also gave input to that guide.
Okay.
Hey, I got a question. The lines on the back of the scutum on the Ceratina, the one picture you used a lot there's an extra lines between the parapsital line and the center line. Do they have names? And maybe mentioning those would be good, because they're really quite obvious in a lot of these specimens, and they're like being ignored in the description.
Yeah, those are artifacts.
Some people.
Yeah,
no, they're
are
really on the specimens. I've been looking at them while you've been talking at real specimens, and those lines are there.
So there should be, I'm going to say that there should be no lines between the parapsital lines and the center line. What might be happening is a partial collapse of the scutum that makes troughs, but it wouldn't be, the kind of stuff that I was seeing online as we were looking at were areas of reflection that looked like that were bouncing off of and reflecting off of some kind of depressed area that was quite different in terms of aspect than the lines themselves.
It's definitely a line there on almost all the specimens I've been pulling out and looking while you've been talking, depending on the angle. It's not quite as deep as the central line, but it's definitely like a suture line that's quite visible.
Right.
Did you see something about that in any of the photos?
Well,
it was quite visible in that one photo that Sam kept looking at.
Okay, so I'm looking here too at a specimen. I think I see what you're talking about actually, and yes, I will say Mike, you are correct. At least on this specimen. It's something that no one ever mentions, though. It's very subtle.
Well, I'm just wondering if that might confuse some people about what's a parapsital line and what's that line. And
oh,
why don't you
interesting.
screen share?
I will, but it is interesting. Like I was like, no, there's no line there, and there is. But I know of no one. First of all, I've never noticed it, and I think you were talking about one of the pictures I was using was in what the heck is going on here? Are you seeing my screen or not, Claire?
We're seeing you move around your screen, but
okay,
yeah.
Good.
So now I see your email, and yes.
This presenting thing is in the way of me opening up. Oh, there we go. This. So this, if we magnify this, yeah. So, oops. So this is the parapsital line right here. This is in osmia. It turns into just like a slightly modified pit. It looks like, but basically they all have that. And here is the central line. And here's the mystery. We'll call them the Slater lines. Just randomly, which I have completely ignored. So yes, good point. I have no name.
It was really obvious on that picture, and then I started pulling specimens. I'm going to have to look at all the species I have specimens for and see what those lines.
So I would say in general, it would be interesting to look at those, because a lot of times it's like, this is how you find new characters and see whether there's differences among species. I'm just completely unaware of this phenomena. So now I have to look at other species groups. Is it just Ceratina that has this? And then also, you can see that they basically peter out at the edge of the anterior set of pits. And mostly we're looking to the posterior of that in terms of characters. So it would be fun and illuminating for everyone to now look at your specimens and see if these
Well,
lines are
I've
present
got
elsewhere.
a dupla specimen under the scope right now, and those lines
Uh-huh.
go way back,
Down into this area,
all the way
or
to
way,
the end of the parapsidal line, at least the rear of the parapsidal
Ah.
line. They're quite long and obvious.
okay,
on a
well, that
dupla
could be a good character then, because see here in this calcarata / mikmaqi or whatever it is, like there's no hint of that line in there. Or is this dupla? This might be the dupla one, or supposed dupla. Let me look at some of my dupla under the microscope and see how far that line goes. I can see the line going further than on screen. It sort of peters out in that area, and it kind of broadens weirdly, at least in that specimen.
Wow. I'll have to sit down and take a bunch of pictures and send them to you all.
Right. Yeah, that's this one sort of peters out like the one on the screen. Yeah, I mean, this is a worthy couple hours of looking at. Now I'm going to look at calcarata and seeing what the pattern of the Slater lines are across species and see if they're useful. It's one thing to have Slater lines. It's another thing to have useful Slater lines. All right. And now I'm going to be curious. So all the species I've looked at so far have them. Now I'm going to be curious as to whether they show up in other species groups besides Ceratina. I mean, we look in Apidae, right? Because this is an Apidae thing. And theoretically, Stylocopa are close kin. Yeah, they all seem to be kind of doing the same thing. I'm going through all the specimens. Yeah, cool. I'm not seeing anything that helps with ID, but who knows what else is going to show up here in some. I wonder if Cockerelli has them. So smooth. Maybe yes, but very faint. All right. Well, Mike, thank you again for pointing that out. And also send me that picture of your experiments with marker fade, if you would.
Oh, yeah, I forgot about doing that. I've got to go take a fresh picture. I'll send you the whole series.
Yeah, cool. All right.
Well, thanks,
Learn
everybody.
something every day.
Nice when I don't have to run and get the kid. I can stay on for the extra cool conversations. Okay, just as an FYI, no class next week. I'll send out an email about it. And maybe I'll have enough time then to get some of these guests to join us to wrap up some Ceratina before we jump back into Andrina, since Mike and Rob are out for a little bit longer.
Yeah.
Sound good, everybody? All right. Great job. Go team. Have a great week.
All right. Thank you, Claire.
Thank
Bye,
you,
everybody.
Sam.